for this. Patti Harter joins us. Her book is called A Sacred Fulfillment on Christmas Eve. Patti, thanks for coming on. Tell us about this story.
Well, for one thing, it's a true story about a real Christmas miracle. And it took place in Seattle, Washington on Christmas Eve in 1995. And it's actually court documented. Okay?
Ooh.
And it's about a mother's love transcending the boundaries of death. There's no other way to perceive this. And at the time this event took place, I was attending a church, a New Age church in Seattle that I really enjoyed. In fact, it was where Kurt Cobain had his memorial service when he passed away. And I was retired at the time, but I'm now retired, I should say. But at that time, I was working as an independent insurance agent, and I specialized in long-term care insurance and had a big account with SPIA, which is a white-collar Boeing union. And I always worked alongside geriatric care managers. So when the minister at the church put out a call to help a senior citizen find new housing, I was, very happy to volunteer. But it turned out to be a much more complicated situation than I expected. And Marion Hume was the name of the person who was looking for new housing. She was 77 years old, and she had been evicted from a HUD apartment in Ballard, Washington, and forced to live in a very unfamiliar neighborhood on the other side of town. When I met with her, she kept insisting she hadn't done the things she had been accused of that led to her eviction, and she just wanted to go home. She kept saying, I want to go back home. So I had been informed prior to our meeting that she was developmentally disabled. And I observed that she was very distressed to be away from her familiar surroundings, and she was having a very difficult time adapting to her new location. And she was just like a lost child. And although I did make some attempts to find housing in her area, there was very little that was available with long waiting lists, and especially for someone like her who was low income and currently on Medicaid. So that was kind of the situation.
The gist of it. So let me stop you. What happened? Don't keep us in suspense. We'll read a lot of the details, but what happened?
So basically what happened is, rather than ignore her proclamations that she was innocent, I decided to contact HUD. And this is kind of another just amazing situation. So it took a while to get past the receptionist on the phone. She thought she was a guilty party. But I was told someone would get back to me. And then a short time later, I get a return phone call from this investigator who said he was on a temporary assignment with HUD, and his name, of all things, was Mr. Ballard. That's the name of the neighborhood that Marion used to live in, okay? So talk about coincidence. So in any event, he said he wanted to come see her right away and check her out. Beautiful man, an absolute angel from heaven. And he said after visiting with her, he didn't believe she was the helter-skelter resident that was described by the manager. So he decided he was going to start a HUD investigation. However, before I could even get that started, I had to get her guardianship agency agree to, sign the paperwork for that. And they wouldn't return my call, so I finally got the papers, went and knocked on their door and got them to sign them. So that sort of began the investigation into, what was going on with her. And the other thing that happened is I also went to the apartment to sort of talk to the residents there. And there was one woman in particular who had accused Marion of knocking on her door very late at night. And my instinct just said, go see her. So I went to see her, and I knocked on her door, just saying I was trying to find a resident in the building. And when I got to her door, I noticed that the bell had been disconnected. So I said, why did you do that? And she said, there's this guy down the hall from me who always comes home inebriated in the middle of the night and wakes me up. So as soon as I heard that, I knew that Marion wasn't the culprit. So basically, I got in touch with HUD right away. They were very, very cooperative, really nice people to work with. And so they said, that's it. We're going to do an investigation on this to see what happened. And they overturned the eviction. So at that point, Marion, when I say she was able to get back home, it still took a long while. The problem with her disability is that any time she was in a strange place, especially like herself, you have to realize she was just like a child. She had a 60 IQ, and she had actually been told to leave school when she was 8 years old, which devastated her mother. Her mother's name was Mary, and she gave birth to her when she was about 37 years old, and her dad was about 50. And she was her only child. And this woman absolutely doted and loved her daughter. I mean, she took tremendous care of her. And the biggest problem that came up, believe it or not, she prepared her so well for living on her own once her mother passed away that very few people believe she was developmentally disabled. It actually caused a problem for her. And I think that was part of the reason she had been evicted, because they thought she was faking her mental retardation. One of the issues that she had, and that in those days they called it retardation. Nowadays it's developmentally disabled. But in any event, she performed so well that even the court at that time, the social workers and everyone insisted that she was fine, that she wasn't developmentally disabled. It was crazy. Nobody ever actually had her sent to a psychologist to have her assessed.
Wow.
So I did those things when I took over the guardianship and found out, indeed, she had a 60 IQ. She also got into a lot of trouble because of lack of supervision, because she had terrible dexterity, and she had a hard time just letting people in through the door at the apartment where she lived. And she'd hold on to the buzzard, and, half the neighborhood would walk through the door before she
right.
Little things like that. And so those caused complaints, but people were not sympathetic with her. They thought she was faking her mental retardation, and that had to do with her mother being taking such beautiful care of this child. But in any event, to go on to the very end, I'm not sure how much time we have left here.
Sure.
What happened is that in the process, I finally got her back to her old apartment, but it took 3 months, and she went through all kinds of things like night terrors and you name it. At the few places where I found she could live close to the place where she'd been evicted, it didn't help. She had to be back in that same place where she was familiar with everything. And everything went very well. She was very happy when she got back. She loved doing coffee clutches with all her friends and having parties and things. And then everything got kind of quiet as Christmas came around. Most of her friends left the building and, went to stay with their family. So I just called her up and I said, hey, I'm going to come over and get you. My daughter, Wendy, wanted to, bring her home with us as well. We were going to celebrate, and she was baking cookies and decorating the house and this and that. So we were preparing for her to come over. But just before I was leaving to pick her up, I get a call from one of her caregivers saying that she had, was acting a little strange, and she was stumbling a little bit. She thought there might be a problem. So, when I went to get her, I picked up her pajamas and stuff like that. And I thought part of it might be at this time of year she really missed her mom. So I thought, well, I'll take her to the church because they were having a candlelight service. And I figured that would really, cheer her up. So I went ahead and I took her to the church, and she kind of, when I got there, she raced out of the car and went and sat inside and was sitting down. And then I came inside and sat down with her, and we sang the first hymn of the evening together, and this was on Christmas Eve, 1995. Mm-hmm. And then a short time when we sat down, she started she's very restless, and I noticed she was sweating, and she pulls off her sweater, and she looked at me, and she just said, I got to get to the bathroom, So I knew something was going on. I didn't know what, but I just sensed something serious was happening. So I grabbed her, and I took her, and on the way out, I told the usher, I said, call an ambulance. There's something happening here. We need an ambulance. And then I took her to the restroom, and where she had a very difficult time. She was kind of falling over. So on the way out, what I did is I took her to the church library, which was right behind the sanctuary. And I knew they had a couch in there, so I laid her on the couch, and then it just came over me, and something just took over. It was no longer just me by myself anymore. I knew her mother was there.
Wow.
And she looked at me, and she said, I'm afraid. And I just looked at her, and I said, Marion, your mommy's here. Go home with your mom.
Aww.
And at that point, she left. There was no fear. There was no pain. She died with a smile on her face from one ear to the other. that's how she passed away.
Wow, what a story! This,
So, this is a true story.
Yeah, it's a true
I wish
story.
I was making it up. I'm not making it up.
It's a true story. We're out of time, but you told it beautifully, actually, and the ending. Wow, good for you.
Let me give a quick ending here, because this is the really important part. Is the very last part.
You got 25 seconds. Go for it.
I'll do it. Okay. Her mother left a last will and testament that I never knew about. And in that, she had only two requests. One was to have her funeral at the church. The second was not to be cremated, to be buried. That neither of those things would have happened had I not become Marion's guardian.
Wow.
This was, I feel that I was blessed to have been a part of what I call a sacred fulfillment on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, and there you go. That's the name of the book, as Patti just said, and that's where you can find that book under that name, A Sacred Fulfillment on Christmas Eve on Amazon. Patti, what a good soul you are, and what a good story. Thank you for telling us that, and thank you for coming on the show.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.